Hey, good evening, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. This is the Comics Masterpiece Edition, and it's January 2022. It's a new year. It's a new sequence of books, and we're starting with it really is. It's a great book. It is a fantastic book. This book, in fact, was nominated for 4 distinct Eisners, and it won one of them, which is really awesome. I'm so impressed by that. And I think this is, we'll ask Greg this, but I think this was Greg's first comic as well, so which makes that even kind of cooler. We are super lucky to have Mr. Greg RUCKA right here. Hello, Greg. How are you, my friend?
Hello. How are you?
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, no, fantastic book, and we can talk about it and talking about making comics and stuff.
Groovy.
This was the first comic, yeah?
It was the first published comic.
Yeah.
I had released 3 novels when it came out, and I think the 4th was coming. Yeah. And through a long and torturous story that has been recounted several times elsewhere, I had met Joe Nosemack and Bob Schreck as they were founding Oni.
Yeah.
And pitched them Whiteout, and they pointed me to Steve Lieber at a comic show here in Portland, Oregon, and Steve and I were off to the races from that. And yeah, it was the first published one. I had written some comics in college, but I can't draw. I mean, I literally should under no account be allowed to try to draw. It may be a sign of the apocalypse. So but it was I mean, I had done my indenture in the craft of storytelling, and when you're a comics fan, and I suspect when you're a comics fan and also see yourself as a writer, you are already trying to figure out how these things get written. And then I had, frankly, and I don't think I've ever said this before, but I should be really clear about this. For all that Joe and Bob brought to the creation of Whiteout, absolutely can never understate how much I learned from Steve.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. I mean, Steve, who is so fresh out of the Kubert school that the cellophane was still stuck to him. But Steve Lieber. Steve Lieber is there's a reason he and Matt Fraction are such a great collaboration.
Right.
And it's because they're both scholars of the form.
Yeah. Like
genuine, like rabbinic scholars of the form. They treat it like Talmud. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, if the scripts worked, and enough people thought they did, that the second story won an Eisner because we didn't win for the first one, basically. It is in large part due to what Steve taught me and brought to it, as much as anything else, if not more. I mean, I've got to be frank about that. So
yeah, I absolutely agree. I'll say the only reason I didn't invite Steve to be here tonight is
you should do one with him.
That you and I were going to eat up like an hour and a half, 2 hours all by ourselves without even trying, and I can do the same with Steve too. So it's better to have separate shows. So
and this is gonna sound false modesty, because it's like going, well, that means I get my own show, but Steve deserves his own.
Yeah,
I mean, and far more educational. I think I'm just opinionated. He's actually got things to teach. So
yeah. No, I'm good with all of that. I kind of skipped what's like actually normally the first question. So let's go back to that, which is why comics, right? Like what is it about the form of comics that speaks to you, that says this is a way that I want to tell stories? Particularly because, as you said, you were a published novelist at that point. You had 3 novels, which were, as I recall, relatively successful. And you could have gone on to be just a novelist, right?
No, I think that's fair. I mean, I suspect, we're talking about a book that came out, in 99?
Yeah.
And you know, I just turned 52 at the end of November, so I'm now entering that stage of life where I'm being a little retrospective. And there is a quantum divergent universe where I didn't go into comics and I just kept banging out novels every year, and probably could have been quite successful at that. I'm not imagining Stephen King level, but I am certainly imagining maybe a couple things would have been optioned or turned into movies, and it would have been a steady gig. And instead, I went with comics, for better or for worse, and this is what you get. With the benefit of hindsight, I can look back and I can say, well, at this point in my life, I have a toolbox of skills that allow me to tell the stories I want to tell in different mediums. I now know how to do it as a short story in prose or long form prose. I can do it as a screenplay with a degree of facility now that allows me to do it. You know, I can continue to get work doing that, and I can do it in the graphic storytelling medium. I can do it in comics. What makes comics the medium of choice for so many stories for me is that it is a form that can do almost anything. And one of the things it does that I particularly love, and I've never really been able to articulate this, but if you look back over my work, you'll see it's all over it. When you are in prose, you're never quiet. The words are always there, and there's always a voice, be it the first person narrator or be it a third person limited omniscient. There is always a voice. And when you watch television or film and there is silence, silence is very rarely sincere in those mediums. It tends to be undercut or augmented with Foley, with incidental music. I love nothing more than a no copy panel in a comic script. I love the moments where the reader, without any conscious effort or thought, is providing either the depth of that silence or the break of it, their ability to imagine the room. I just finished a comic script that had been literally giving me fits for 7 months. And there are some no copy panels. There's some silent panels in it where I hope to God when people read it, and knowing, you know, my collaborator on that book, the art will convey it. The pregnancy in those pauses, the sound of furniture creaking slightly underneath people, that's just one of the things that I love about the medium.
Is the audience participation at that point?
Absolutely, and both active and I don't want to say passive, but subconscious. For people who are comics literate, right? And you have to become comics literate, right? You have to know how to read a comic. For those who can read a comic, though, it is as ingrained and natural and automatic a process as it is for you and I to immediately read the words whiteout over your shoulder. Right? And not look at them and go WHI, right? It's just there. And the power of that, and, you know, and people far smarter than I have talked about the potential in the gutter, you know, the magic between the panels.
It is comics.
Yes.
Honestly, I think.
That's where it happens. And I can, you know, I am a writer. My skill is primarily manifested as my ability to move 26 letters around over and over and over again into a sequence that, when presented to, especially in comics, to my collaborator, conveys what we are trying to do in the story.
Right.
And then at that point, my job is to bolster and assist their choices.
Yeah.
Not to override them. So it is, and that goes to the other thing. You want to know why comics? I wrote novels for a really long time. My last novel, I think, came out I don't know. It was I can't remember when Bravo came out. Bravo was the last like original novel I wrote.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of things around that novel that made it a traumatic experience. But it was not by any stretch the hardest novel I had ever written. Like Critical Space, which was hard, and Walking Dead, which as of now is the last in the Kodiak series, was really messed me up. Writing prose for me is an agonizingly isolating experience. It is literally going away from the world for 6 to 9 months and living in my head. And I can go through the motions of being with people, and I can pick up the kids and take them to school, and I can have a conversation with my bride, and I can do all the normal things human beings are supposed to do.
Yeah.
But prose is a solitary pursuit.
Is this because of the single voice? That in order to channel that single voice, you need that level of focus? Or
I don't think it's that. I mean, I don't think it is that I was so precious about my process, right? That it
no, I didn't mean it that way. I meant it the other way around, which is
I'm being self-depreciating. I didn't think there was an insult there.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is that it's non-collaborative.
Yeah.
That's the thing that takes you away, is that you're doing it all.
That's exactly what I was saying, in fact.
Yeah. It's you're alone in it. And even if you have great readers, if you've got an editor who is actively engaging, or an agent who is actively engaging, it's still you sitting in a room by yourself with people who aren't there talking to you and trying to get it out. When I'm making comics, because, as I've said, I absolutely cannot draw, it is definitionally collaborative. And the embrace of that collaboration, when it works well, is the best possible manifestation of a collaborative creative experience.
Yeah.
Whiteout, if Whiteout still has merit, Whiteout has merit not because I had an idea for a murder mystery in Antarctica, but because Steve Lieber and I came together and created the work from the idea. Yeah. And that collaboration made the idea better. And I can go through my whole comics work now over, coming up on 25 years. And I can point to the books that were the best books to me. Now, people may think, well, this is better or this is worse. But to me, the best works are the ones where the collaboration clearly flew.
Yeah.
Gotham Central is always going to be a perennial example of that.
Yeah.
Lark, Brubaker, myself. And the book suffered after Ed left and after Mike left. And that's not to disparage anybody else, but it is to say it became something else when I was left to carry it by myself.
Yeah. Because the
And
collaboration changes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I was working with different artists then. It was a
Yeah.
rotating group of artists because it
Mhm,
was that DC grind again.
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm, mhm,
so I am, you know, and having actually been involved in the making of a feature film, which is arguably the most collaborative artistic endeavor you can pursue if you are willing to ascribe artistic endeavor next to business endeavor that it is.
Sure.
Um, you know, you don't make a movie if you're not collaborating. It's why auteur theory is such bullshit.
Right.
But it is also an incidence of where you can have too much collaboration, right? Comics is perfectly tailored. It is just intimate enough, right? And even on a book, say like Lazarus, where it's Michael, it's me, it's Troutman, you know, on design, it's Santi on colors, it's Boland on the letters, it's Arbona editing it, it's Richard Howe doing additional artifacts, right? I'm up to 7 people.
Yeah.
But it is still a manageable and I think functional collaboration. So
Sure. And but I'd also, you know, I'd go back to that the audience collaborates as well in a way that they don't in movies, because movies unspool at the speed that they unspool, and you can't stop that. I mean, you can pause it to go to the bathroom, but that's not the same thing, right? Like when I read a comic, it is really frequent that I will skip back 4 pages and go, let me reread that section again. I never do that when watching a movie because it's, if I do, then that means the movie's lost me, if you know what I mean. Whereas in comics, that's actually a sign that it's got me. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think when films do achieve it, you can, I suppose, make an argument that certain stories as film do invite a level of audience collaboration. There are questions left open. There are moments for the audience to supply. But the nature of the medium, and in particular the nature of the market, is such that those are fewer and far between. Market believes that you shouldn't have any time to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. Market believes we got to keep it coming. We got to keep it coming. We got to keep it coming.
Yeah.
And I mean, I watched a movie last night where I was like, this is staggeringly dumb. And they're just hoping I won't notice. If they keep going fast enough, they're hoping I won't sit here and go, that doesn't make any sense, guys. It makes no sense whatsoever. Audience collab, and this is arguably, I suppose, one of the reasons that the comics fan base is, for its relative size compared to other fan bases, such a powerful and engaged one, because they are engaged from the get-go, right? The work has no merit without the audience to participate in it.
And to write and to influence to a certain extent, particularly when you're looking at the big universes, right? I absolutely believe that the audience influences what those stories end up becoming.
Yes.
Because you as an author are listening to your audience and going, I want to give you what you want,
for better or for worse.
Want, right?
Well, you know, this won't win me any friends. I'm a firm believer in never, I won't say you don't give the audience what they want, but you don't ever take direction from the audience.
Sure.
And I have known, especially at the big 2, way too many writers who have alternate screen names and were on every forum back when they were forums, and news groups back when it was news groups, and are looking for their name on Twitter every time an issue drops, and they are taking, it's literally like, it's not going to a restaurant.
Yeah.
and ordering
Yeah.
off a bill of fare.
Yep.
You don't do it that way.
Yep. Yeah. I'll even go a step further. I know many editorial people who do the same. And I think that editor and publisher action in kind of stacking the deck encourages the people below them to do the same thing at the end of the day.
It
without naming names, you know.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we'll do that off air. But, yeah, I mean, I think that way madness lies. Now, this may just be that I am turning into, an old man who shouts at cloud. But I do feel that, I am aware, for instance, in the old guard, what a portion of the fan base is hoping for.
Sure.
Right? They may get it. It may not be in the box they thought it was coming in. Right? I do believe that stories, and I suppose here Grant Morrison and I oddly are standing on a similar plank, and Grant and I come from very different places. But I do believe in stories as a force and as an entity. And in the last, say decade, I have become, much to my chagrin, and you can see it on my head, right? This is the Ankh-Morpork City Watch badge, right? I have become a huge Terry Pratchett devotee. And one of the things that Pratchett argues quite eloquently, amongst with a couple other gentlemen in some of his more scientific theory works, that human beings are narrative creatures. That what granted us the evolutionary step to become as we are was the ability to tell the story. To say, if you go over that hill, there's a dragon and treasure. And our ability to tell that story is what has driven us forward. And I do believe, to a great extent, that there is a power to the story that exists outside of such things. That we, and especially audiences, are sophisticated. They are sophisticated. And they know, they may not be able to articulate why a story doesn't work.
Sure. But
they know if it doesn't.
Sure.
And they know when you cheated.
Sure. And
they know when you're pandering.
Yeah.
And in particular, we get a lot of pandering from the big two these days. Yeah. A lot of pandering.
Yeah.
And then they go, oh, numbers are down. I wonder why. It's because it's crap, guys.
Yeah.
It's not because everybody's playing video games. It's because you're writing shitty stuff and you're selling them shitty stuff. And people don't want to buy shitty stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to think that this is a natural end product of the firm corporatization that Marvel and DC, in the form of Warner Brothers and Disney, has taken on, right? Because at this point, and even as recently as 5 or maybe even 10 years ago, like people who I trust as stewards of comics were still making all of the wrong decisions to please their corporate masters, and I could see it happening, and you could tell them that, and they'd even agree with you as they were having drinks. Right. But then they would go into work the next day and they would just do it all over again because
trying to survive and
trying to survive. And not understanding that is actually the opposite of what you need to survive.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to name any names, but there was a particular publisher who and I know very well, who was very much in that thing. And at the end of the day, he got fired and kicked to the curb in 2 seconds, and nobody looked back ever. And all of the things that he did to get him into that place didn't actually help him, I would argue.
Well, and won't last. I mean, and that's the legacy now. We can go off into what I feel is the tragic state of mainstream comics in the U.S. right now.
Yeah,
I will say that I think we crossed that Rubicon.
Yeah,
when Disney / Marvel realized what they had,
Sure.
and when Warner Brothers did the same.
Sure.
And the
But
comics,
I think I would
the
put
comics
to
no
you,
longer have merit
the thing I would
as
put
anything
to
other
you,
than IP.
particularly with your career in the big two, is that
And
it
my
shows.
complicity, don't forget my complicity
Yeah, okay.
in it.
I mean, so there's complicity, and let's talk about complicity at some point. But I want to sort of talk about the good and the sincere part, and I want to talk about. I mean, I actually am of the opinion that something like a Gotham Central or a 52 actually might be the best example. Is the best possible example of what comics can be. In that mainstream narrative, right? Because
Yeah.
you are moving the story forward, but you're doing it from a sincere place, not from an insincere place,
Yeah.
right? It's character driven, and it's the needs of the characters and your ability to communicate that. And again, working with collaborators who, even though they don't agree with you specifically on any specific thing, are all trying to get to the same end goal.
And
that
all
changed.
building.
It changed after that. It
Yeah.
seems to me.
I don't disagree with that. And I mean, you can talk about Gotham Central. You know, when Ed and I were trying to pitch that book, we were meeting resistance. DC was like, you're not going to be able to do this because, you know, Batman's not in it. And we were like, that's the point. Have you seen this book over here? It's called Powers. It's by these guys named Bendis and Oming. And I don't know if you picked it up. There is room for this. We can do this. And we ended up getting the book approved by sliding it literally sliding it in front of Jeanette Kahn, in front of the editor-in-chief at the time.
Right.
You know, so that literally she said, yeah, let's do it. And we were able to go, ha ha, we've got a book. Yeah. Now, for all the merits of Central, to DC, today, 2022, it is a success because they have mined it mercilessly, right? Sure. They have extracted every idea they could from it, and they put it into all the media they could.
Sure, sure.
And the book has sold, right? It still exists in trades. I'm relatively sure you have copies in the store right now.
I think it's out of print this second.
Right, but because they're prepping for the show or whatnot.
And they keep doing these things where they take them in and they take them out, and then they put it out as a $50 hardcover, and it's in print as a $50 hardcover, but it's not accessible to anybody.
Right.
Because it's not a $15 paperback.
Which doesn't make any sense.
Sorry, that's my rant.
No, I'm with you on that, because it's like, so you're looking for separate thing. The issues themselves, you know, that book, I don't think broke 25,000 at any point. It was always a book that was going to get canceled.
Sure.
And the only thing that really kept it from being canceled was that it was a critical darling. And the people who had found it and read it loved it and were noisy about it. Mm-hmm. You look at 52, you know, and again, 52 came out of, we knew there was going to be, the heroes are going to go away for a year, right? The question is, what happens when Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman take the year off, right? They've earned it. Mm-hmm. And naturally out of that comes the format of, well, you can tell a book, you do it in a weekly. Let's chronicle the year. And then the process becomes, what do we want to talk about in that year? 52 works, and I maintain it works, because nobody sat down and said, I have a Lobo story.
Right.
When we were coming up with 52, we were in a conference room and literally had up on a whiteboard, what do we want to talk about? And it's, what does it mean to die in the DC universe? And from that, you get the Ralph story, and you get the Montoya arc, right? What does it mean to be a hero? And you get all the Luthor and John Henry stuff, right? What is space like in the DC universe? And that's where you get Adam Strange and Starfire, and that So it was built thematically first. It was, where do we want to go and what do we want to say?
Yeah.
And nowhere in that was there a question of, what does the audience want?
Right.
And it wasn't because nobody cared. It was because we couldn't engage in that conversation. To accomplish the project, we had to start it a full 7 months before the first issue dropped.
Right, right.
You know, there wasn't time to go out and take anybody's temperature on it. And the result of that was, we all had to commit to what we were doing. You had to believe in the story you were telling.
Yeah.
And the stories were about something.
Yep.
Not about how many issues can I sell, not about can I grab a headline for a while,
yeah,
not about can I get to a run of 50.
Yeah.
It was what are we trying to say? And I am not, gonna take a great big brush and tar everybody, working in mainstream right now to imply that they are not trying to say something.
Oh, of course.
But from the publisher, that is absolutely a secondary. It is not a driving concern. If you have something if there is a story that you are burning to tell and you manage to tell it, you manage to do it in spite of of everything in your way, not because you were being supported in the effort.
No, sure. And I mean, I would go so far as to say that the fact that 52 was followed by 2 more yearly series, shows the disconnect. Not that the creators who did those yearly series were bad people or they weren't doing what they were supposed to, but they didn't come from the same place. No. I don't think creatively, right?
I think that was I think the fatal flaw of it. The stories were fantastic in conception, but the engine that drove it became entirely commercial.
So you've worked on a lot of commercial stories with a lot of different creative teams and a lot of different creative ways. You had a multi-year run on Batman where you had 3 or 4 different major arcs that were across stories. You did it on Superman, cross stories. These bits of Infinite Crisis and 52 and all of that. What to you makes, tell me if I'm phrasing this wrong, but what makes a good writer's room versus a less productive one? Did I phrase that right at all? Or
I think I'm following. I mean, look, where there have been events that were successful that I participated in, they were events where story drove. And everybody in the room was looking to service the story. And that wasn't to say it's not kumbaya in those rooms, right? I have been known to walk out of a room because I need 10 minutes alone to hack a butt on the sidewalk before I go back in there because somebody might die if I remain.
Right.
I mean, and this is, jumping back in time, I can't remember. There's so many crises. Infinite Crisis.
Yeah. Right.
Was Infinite.
Yeah.
Yeah. that came out of a room with a small group of writers. And I would argue that the support work, which was the majority of the stuff that came out of that room, the collaborative support work was the most successful part about it, right? The main series in and of itself maybe didn't hit the buttons it wanted to hit, but things like the OMAC project and so on did. And that's a perfect example of what was done in collaboration and what was done in isolation.
Right.
When when I've been involved in events or crossovers where it is small and the writers and the artists are all engaged in participating as opposed to taking dictation, it has uniformly been better work.
Yeah.
Denny O'Neil, may he rest in peace, was great at conjuring the environments for that. No Man's Land still works. It's absurd. It shouldn't work.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's a silly idea on the face of it. Great year's worth of books.
Yeah.
And it was a story that had an ultimate narrative that worked. It came together. Some of the Superman stuff I did started as it's going to be one thing, and then quite literally, I can remember being in an editor's office at DC and having somebody come in and say, "Oh, you're not going to do that now. You're going to do this."
Ugh.
And
Ugh.
literally sitting there being like, dude, we've got scripts in.
Yeah.
You just blew this up. This is now going to suck.
Yeah.
And guess what? There's only so much duct tape in the world.
Yeah.
You know, and duct tape is magical and wondrous. And you can probably get a structure to stand with it, but it will ultimately collapse.
Was this, and I don't remember the circumstance at the time, was this because of external events or corporate direction, or
it was because of internal politics and vanity ego on the part of a writer,
right?
Who was able to literally walk in and swing his dick and knock over anybody who got in the way,
right?
And you know, and the other thing when you get into environments like that is that one of the beauties, and this is the greatest thing about the Big Two, is that it's this shared universe, the continuity, you know, and I am not a huge fan of continuity, but I am a fan of history, right?
Sure.
When these things work, they engage it and they cherish the continuity, and then they find new ways to articulate it or to interpret it or to expand upon it.
Sure.
They don't throw it out. They don't ignore it. And one of the things that I've seen is there's been a whole lot of continuity. It's not shared. It's everybody goes off into their own corner, and then it's people fighting in their fiefdoms. It's not saying, if I'm doing this over here, what are you doing over there? It can simply be as easy as, I'm just reading the stuff that you're doing and trying to respect it in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you know, again, I think probably in the early aughts, and then it got progressively worse, it became far less about how can we service each other, and it became much more it became much more reflective of the current political moment, which is, I got mine, fuck you.
Yeah.
I mean, it really did. It was like, well, I don't care what you're doing over in Wonder Woman. I'm going to do this over here in Batman, and nuts to you. And it's like, well, then that's not that's not collaborative.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not collaborative.
You know, the only thing I'll say as a counter to that, and it's not even a counter to that, is that's not a new situation. That's always been the case. Neil Gaiman certainly told me many stories about things happening to him where they wanted to use Sandman in completely inappropriate ways, you know, 35 years ago at this point, right? Like, so this is a continual,
but they didn't get to, is the difference. Right. The difference is when somebody said, "Oh, I'm going to have Dream show up in this issue of Detective Comics." Right. Karen came downstairs and said, "Like hell you will," and it didn't happen. Right. And that may, and we talk about Neil now, you know, and it's capital Neil with gold leaf and filigree, capital Gaiman with gold leaf and filigree. Yeah. He was just Neil Gaiman back then.
Just Neil Gaiman then,
Right. Yeah. I mean, and and there was an editorial power there that said, I don't care what this writer wants to do. You have to respect what's happening here.
Yeah.
When you are literally at the old DC building in New York, all the superhero editors are on the same floor, and they can't be arsed to go down 6 doors and say, hey, could you maybe take a look at what we're doing so we don't keep tripping over each other?
Right.
Or more specifically, the writers in your group literally coming over here and seeing what our group is doing and deciding to hit it with a fire hose. Why do that?
Yeah.
Why do that? These are quite literally infinite universes that are made to be filled with creations. Why would you stymie that? Why would you damn it? Why would you damage it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's more common today than it was then, because I think then editors were not trained necessarily, but came up in a system where they respected one another and they worked with one another. Whereas I feel like for the last 15, 20 years, editors are much more about, oh, no, I'm just here to keep the train running. And the train's got to go, and it's got to go there. And if it's not going there, then
they're out of a job.
I lose my job, you know?
There's that, and I think there's another thing that genuinely can't be overstated, which is, and it started with Frank Miller, and that's not to say Frank Miller started it, because I do not believe he did. But it starts really with Frank Miller. You get it with Neil, which is the writer becomes the superstar. And you get it with the birth of Image. The artist becomes the superstar. And that gives rise to a group of creatives who see themselves emulating that. That's what they're angling for.
Yeah.
I am here to milk this to get that. And I think that has been abundantly clear, and you can see it. You know, if you're a student of the industry and of the form, and in particular the American superhero form, you can look and it doesn't take a long time to figure out the names.
Sure.
And
100%.
And this goes back to, talking about 52 and so on, right? Which is, in theory, and I'm somewhat embarrassed to use these words. In theory, that was a group of some of the biggest writers in the industry at the time.
Yep.
And I hesitate to include myself amongst them, right? But to have Grant Morrison and Jeff Johns and Mark Waid all in the same table, that was a big damn deal.
It was. Yep.
And none of them, and Keith, and none of them was looking at it going, how do I use this for me? The question was always, how are we serving the character?
Yeah.
Not how is the character serving me?
Yeah.
How are we serving the character? And I think that question is the most crucial question when we talk about the longevity of a Marvel universe or a DC universe.
Sure.
Are you servicing these characters? Are you making them look better? Are they going to be better off when you leave? And I'm not sure, and I don't want to sound Pollyanna about it, but but I do feel that there's a responsibility to this, in the same way that story is a thing that exists. These are characters that are so much bigger than any of us. So much bigger than any of us. And, not respecting that when you are putting words in their mouths.
Yeah.
And I don't know a writer, literally don't know a writer. Bendis talks about this. Fraction has talked about it. I do not know a writer who the first time they put words in Superman's mouth has not sort of sat up straighter at their desk, right? Because the first time you are writing Superman, in theory, that should be a pretty damn important moment.
Yeah.
You know, you want to get him right.
Yeah.
Not, you want to respect that legacy and what the character represents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, so, but, you know, again, I mean, this might be, you know, old guy shouting at cloud. So.
No. I mean, I don't think it is. I think it's really true. Let me sort of ask one last question on sort of the DC Marvel thread.
Sure.
Just because I don't want the whole topic that we were talking about.
Dude, we could make it an hour on that alone.
But the thing I actually wanted to talk to you specifically about is like, clearly a lot of people have written excellent Batman, and and many people have written excellent Superman. Almost no one has managed to write good Diana. It's you and it's George Perez, and like maybe there's a run here and there. Gale had a good run, but there's an awful lot of not good in all of that. What do you think? Is it what is it that prevents people from finding their voice to support her?
I think, look, I mean, again, Brian, how much time do you have? Did you have plans
I have
this
as
evening?
much time as you have, my friend. So
there are a couple things. I've spent a lot of time thinking about Diana, and I think that that's probably the answer to your question. But it comes down to perhaps this, and I've said this elsewhere as well, but I think this is a good, it is certainly an entry into the conversation. If you tell Spider-Man's origin story tomorrow, you don't have to change a single thing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you really don't. If you're willing to accept that bitten by a radioactive spider gave him powers, then the rest of the origin story is him going, I am going to shirk this responsibility and I'm going to try to get some money. And as a result, my Uncle Ben dies. And I move forward from this tragedy, going with, great power comes great responsibility. If you cap Bruce Wayne's parents in an inner city alley tomorrow, all you really have to do is adjust the Wayne fortune for inflation and you still get Batman.
Sure.
And if an infant child crashes to Earth from a doomed planet and lands in a mythical middle America that is the embodiment of the best American values, that hard work is rewarded, that we do the right thing because we are good neighbors to each other, that we take responsibility for our actions, that we're all in it together, you get Superman.
Yeah.
Feminism in 1938 is not feminism in 2021.
Right.
And it's not feminism in 2022. And if you cannot engage Diana, both on the level of the mythology, of the origin of the character and the point of origin, but also as what she is meant to represent, which is an embodiment of a feminist ideal, not feminine ideal. If you don't engage that, you are left with shrieking Harridan who has a sword and a shield instead of a lasso.
Sure.
You don't engage the contradictions that say it's actually not a lasso, guys, it's a whip. And you do not engage with one of the core principles of the character, which is she comes into the world as a, she is a warrior priest. And politics and
but she's also naive, right? Like
I don't think she's naive. What she is she is a stranger in a strange land.
Okay.
Right? She is experiencing culture shock. And depending on how you play it, it's a culture shock or it's a cultural engagement.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why I've always hated the idea that Diana has never had a romantic relationship or sex before Steve comes along.
Right. Right.
Right? Because it's like, so she's basically not lived a life.
Right.
Right? She's just this wide-eyed who literally goes, oh, penis, that's what I've been waiting for all this time. And it absolutely undermines everything that we present Themyscira is, which is paradise.
Right.
And in paradise, you should be able to love and be loved.
Sure.
And that means that if for you, one of the things is in your paradise is intimate sexual contact, you should be able to get that.
Yeah.
Right? It's there. You're not being punished. They're not chased. So what we invariably end up with are low-hanging fruit interpretations of the trappings of Diana. We go to a sword and shield. We make her Red Sonja. Right. She becomes Red Sonja.
Yeah.
And Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, the X-Men even, because the X-Men also work perennially for exactly the same reasons, right? If the X-Men is, right now, the X-Men could be a metaphor for any group you want struggling for recognition and acceptance, right? But let's just say immigrants. It's a great immigrant allegory right now. Marvel does this better than DC, but you are not obligated to engage in the political discussion. Or the political discussions, for instance, between Charles and Magneto they're theoretical because they're in this world of mutants. Diana's political engagement is real and manifest and now. And when people run away from it, the character falls flat on her face. And I don't expect my Diana to age well in the same way that I don't think, in another 50 years, George's Diana is going to read like the original, Marston ones. Yeah. And that's good. That's good because our understanding of the dialogue Diana is engaging in should be evolving. It shouldn't be. It's not a static conversation. The conversation about random violence is bad and traumatic is not really one that needs to be relitigated. Nobody's going to look at Bruce Wayne and go, actually, it's kind of good what happened to you. They're always going to go, no, that was a tragedy. It should happen to no 8-year-old. No 8-year-old should experience what you went through. Yeah. Right. But what it means, and what Diana is trying to promote is always, we are a far, far, far distance from that conversation being done and dusted.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like Themyscira and just the Amazons being there is half of the problem. That because no one knows what to do with them. Krypton's great because they're dead.
It blew up.
Right?
Yeah,
blew up. Right. So we can make them a metaphor. We can do whatever we want to with them, but they don't come here and interfere. Right. But if the Amazons are the real and they're over there, then that's like a genuine problem. Which is why at least 5 times in my lifetime.
Yeah, Themyscira's gone. Poof.
Right, or's declared war on us. Like one of the two, right? Like,
look, man,
hackiest fucking stories.
You're gonna love. Here's a digression. You'll love this. They eventually did Amazon's Attack, but Amazon's Attack had been initially conceived as part of the Infinite Crisis stuff, and I had a breakdown for it, and the artist for it was supposed to be Ethan Van Sciver. And so you can set the time machine back for this. This is before all the crazy was showing. But I will never forget going to a dinner with him, Dan DiDio, and myself, where I was explaining what was going to happen. And there was a sequence in it where quite literally, I mean, look, they've got invisible jets, you know, so you put the president on Air Force One. It's the shortest war the U.S. has ever been involved in, right? Because once they go to active hostilities, the Amazons, they put the president on Air Force One to get him somewhere safe. The Amazons board Air Force One in flight, literally grab him and say, right, call him off, surrender.
Yeah.
And it literally was the shortest war. I mean, literally, it was like, right, I surrender.
Sure.
It's like, we have the whole cabinet and you.
Yeah.
Surrender. These are our terms. And the look on his face when I explained, like, that was it. This is what the story is actually about. It's not about the war. It's about the aftermath of America losing it. And the Amazons being like, how the fuck do we occupy this country? We don't want it.
Yeah.
We don't want, what we want is for you people to leave us alone.
Yeah.
Right? You are problems. You guys are all walking problems. And if Diana wants to be out there and help you solve them, that's her divine mission.
Right.
Knock yourself out, Deity. We're going home.
Yeah.
Leave us. There was a reason we removed ourselves from you motherfuckers.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I will just never forget the look on his face as I'm describing. Oh, no, they win like that. Just like that. See, they've got purple healing rays, which by definition means they've got purple death rays, and they've got invisible jets.
Yeah.
You're screwed.
Yeah.
You're screwed.
I somehow I hope he doesn't see this and decide to make a podcast about this.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure he will too. It'll be another one. It'll be another one about what a pinko horrible human being I am. Okay, great.
Yeah. I agreed. We both are. So let's stop talking
more
about
lesbians. Oh my god!
Except as a foil now. Let's talk about Whiteout, and let's talk about independent comics, and let's talk about that. And let me just remind anybody who's out there who's watching, if you have a question, put it up in the thing. Oh, Ben's telling me there is a question. Let's put up a question while we hit the pause.
Okay.
Pudrigo, hello, Pudrigo. You excel at crafting very interesting female characters. What opportunities and challenges come from writing a female character versus male? To which I'll add, are there challenges in that?
Yeah, there are fundamentally challenges when you're, an ostensibly cishet white guy.
Yeah.
Who, for instance, is trying to write, the experience of a queer second-gen Dominican woman in Gotham City. So to answer the first part, look, the opportunities are the second you really commit to it, and I will get to the commitment because that's part of the challenges, but the second you commit to it, the opportunities are staggering.
Yeah.
Because, even today, right now, where we have, a good 15 years, 20 years now in the American canon, at least, of attempting to slowly address the gross iniquity in depiction, like, where we're moving away from everybody being a white middle-aged guy.
Sure.
Sure. The narratives are still and the narrative tropes that we exist within are still primarily ones that are crafted through a male gaze and from a male experience. And the second you engage those situations sincerely from a female POV, you can literally tell the same story in a completely different way. A femme fatale becomes a very different character if your private eye is a woman.
Yeah.
And that goes to the challenges, right? The challenges are, I would argue, the same challenges one hopefully embraces as a writer writing any actual experience as opposed to entirely made up experience, by which I mean I don't know what it is to be telepathic water creature from the planet Gorgiblas, right? I can make all that up. But I know women. I can be sensitive to and aware of what their experience is moving through the world. I can talk to women and say, is this right? Can you show me that? Can you teach me about this? If I write women well, it is because I grant them the exact same legitimacy and sincerity and authenticity and emotional truth that I would grant to any male character. But it also means that, again, contingent on environment and setting of the story, I would argue that it's incumbent on the writer to be aware of their blind spots. And that is a little oxymoronic. If it's a blind spot, you may not see that you can't see it. But, being a writer is an odd combination of having to have incredible humility and extraordinary arrogance. You have to have the arrogance to believe that what you are saying, the story you are telling, is something people will spend money to read, which is crazy. But at the same time, you also have to engage with the work, absolutely understanding and recognizing all the things you know nothing about. And if you are not, like I said before, audiences know when you're insincere. Audiences know when you're pandering. Audiences know what's true. That's not the same as what's factual. They know what's true. And we are engaged by stories regardless of their setting because we connect to the emotional truth of them. There are universals here. And, as a writer with any character, male, female, black, white, however, you need to be true. And it doesn't matter if it's Superman or not, right? You can write Superman. There's no reason your inability to be bulletproof, fire lasers from your eyes, and fly also means you cannot be emotionally true to the things that are universal for a guy who can do those things.
Sure.
So
in almost every one of your creator-owned works, Whiteout, Stumptown, Queen and Country, Black Magic, Lazarus, Old Guard, they're all female protagonists.
Yeah.
First and foremost, is there a reason that because you must have made a conscious decision at some point that I'm going to make these female protagonists rather than a middle-aged guy like myself, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't see it right now because it's literally opposite the camera. I have on the wall opposite me this piece Michael Lark gave me for my 50th birthday, and it is quite literally a picture of Rowan, Andy, Forever, Diana, Renee, and I believe 8, all coming out of a soccer game, right? So it's literally like, oh, all your girls, right? These are all the ladies that you are now known for. The easy answer is I like it. I like writing them. I find these women compelling and fascinating, and I'm a guy and I live a guy and I know a guy, and I know guyness. I'm very guy. I find their journeys in the main far more compelling.
Because it's not your experience then.
Yeah. I think that's a large part of it. Now, one can probably dig into that, and we can talk about questions of, you know, I have always been, I cannot remember a time I wasn't aware of gender politics, and very quickly after that, sexual politics. And I can't point to a specific thing that happened when I was 7 or whatnot. But I know enough about me to know these are always things that I have studied and wanted to interrogate and examine. And as a writer in fiction, that's my readiest tool for those those examinations, those questions. So
okay, makes sense to me. Ben, was there another question, or we're good? Okay. So if anybody else has a question, feel free to ask it, and we'll see about maybe getting to you, or maybe we won't. We'll see. Okay, so let's talk
I'm
about
assuming somebody's watching, because we got at least one question, so it's a good sign.
People are watching, and
okay,
it's all good. We keep it hidden so that we don't like worry about it while we're doing the show, you know. Okay, so Whiteout.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for it? Where did this come from?
So I had gotten my master's degree at USC in what was called the Masters of Professional Writing program, which is not an MFA. It was basically them going sort of a cut rate MFA. And my thesis had been the first Kodiak novel. It was a book called Minder. And my thesis advisor said, this is an excellent novel, and I'm giving you an A, and you get honors, and I'm going to send it to this editor I know who's no longer an editor. He's going to be a literary agent. He's going to tell you why he can't sell it. And I said, he's going to tell me why he can't sell it? He said, yeah. All right. So the agent in question calls me like 2 months later, and he says, I've read your novel. I'd very much like to represent it. And I said, great, let's do that. And then he proceeded to try to sell it and absolutely failed dismally, and we couldn't sell it anywhere. And I started to work on another one. And as I was working on the other one, he mentions to me in a conversation offhand that there is a federal marshal responsible for Antarctica. And I remember literally stopping what I was doing, and my first thought was, who do you piss off to get that job? Like, what did you do wrong?
Right.
For, you know, the Department of Justice to go, right, you, McMurdo. So this was long enough ago. The internet was not how you research things. And we were living in Eugene, Oregon at that time. Jen was attending the U of O, and we literally were living a block from the Eugene Public Library. So I spent a week just in the library reading everything I could about Antarctica. And the more I read, the more I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is awesome for a mystery. It's a locked continent mystery. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And that's where it was born. Now, Carrie was a character who had been bouncing around in my head prior to that, because when I was at USC, I had written a one-act play with a deputy marshal in it named Carrie Stutko. So it was a logical extension. That was sort of part of the character's backstory. And yeah, it went from there. It was only later that I found out that, in point of fact, that's not what happens. What happens is, I believe, and this may have changed because we're talking about, you know, it's over 20 years out of date. But it used to be, what happened was that the station manager of McMurdo got deputized by the marshal out of Hawaii. That was considered the nearest regional office, and that deputization made the station manager have these legal powers if they were needed.
Interesting.
But it's a much cooler story if there's actually, like, no, there's one law enforcement officer, right, and it's you, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So, you had written 3, I think, novels at that point.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
you
think
knew how to pitch
Smoker
a
had come
book,
out. Yeah,
clearly. You had gone to school to pitch a book.
yeah.
You talked to Joe and Shrek,
Bob, yeah.
and also thank God for those guys starting Oni when they did. I gotta say,
Yes.
they're, they're, both of their names have kind of gone away in a lot of ways in comics, and I don't think they get enough credit for what they built.
Hopefully the names have sort of gone away because they're each kind of enjoying their retirements in a way.
Yeah,
They
no,
have
for
earned
sure.
it. They put in their years. So
For sure. But they say, would you like to do a comic? I mean, how did you come up with a pitch from a novelistic background? You know what I mean?
I actually didn't even have the pitch. I met Shrek on the mezzanine at San Diego Comic-Con, and I had with me like paperbacks of the first 2 novels. And he had agreed to meet with me, and we sat down, and I put them in front of him, and you could see the look of terror in his eyes. He was like, "You don't want to adapt these?" I was like, No. These are just sort of my bona fides. I have an idea for this murder mystery set in Antarctica, and it's only going to work as a comic because I have tried writing the prose, and it's taken me 5,000 words to explain that it's the driest, coldest place in the world. And look at page 1 of Whiteout, and Lieber does it in a page.
Yeah.
And I think I acquitted myself well enough that Bob was like, "Well, I tell you what, I mean, that sounds really cool. Let me read this stuff and let you know." And I met Joe at the same show, and it was pleasant. And we all went back to our separate corners after the show. And I got a call about a week later saying, "We are really interested in working with you. We've read the novels," and so on.
Oh, nice.
So at that point, it was like, well, I wrote a script already. Here's the first issue. And I got some notes back on it. But on the basis of that, I was starting to write it before we had even found Steve.
Interesting. Okay, wait. So let me back up just half a step. You were at San Diego as a fan?
Yeah, I wasn't in the industry and
specifically trying to find work, or
yeah.
Oh, you were okay. So you were going there to pitch as much as anything else.
Well, I was going as a fan, but I would go by editors and I would try to get them to give me the time of day, and most of them would be like, "Go away, go away." And a woman named Patty Jarris swung an introduction to Bob, and that was how that came about. But I had been going for a couple years at that point, and would put my novels in front of people, and it really was like, go away. I can remember meeting Stuart Moore that way the first time. I'm not sure he remembers it, but quite literally him having the haunted look in his eye of like, "Go away, crazy fan," and me being like, I bathed, I did deodorant, nothing's on me, I'm okay. So yeah, that was I had wanted to write comics, and I wanted to write comics because I loved comics.
What were your examples of comics that made you think that independent comics were a viable thing to do?
Well, I had spent some time. Kamiko was really the gateway drug for that. And it was weird because I didn't have a particular. There wasn't a prejudice. I didn't go in going like, well, to get to DC, I'm going to have to put in time here. It was literally, these are all comics, right? And I remember buying and loving Fish Police, and then in the next breath, Grendel, and when at college picking up Denny's Question Run and all of these, I was very fortunate in the sense that I was in college. I was in late high school and into college during sort of that late 80s, early 90s golden age. That begins with sort of Born Again, and has Dark Knight, and has Year One, has Longbow Hunters, has Watchmen, has Mage, you know, all of these books that made it abundantly clear there was more than just there was more than just the X-Men. And you know, I was in with a group of Marvel Zombies. We were all huge X-Men fans throughout high school, but that was the gateway drug to comics. It wasn't no, you had to stay in this corral. So, you know, when I did Whiteout, I actually didn't think this will inevitably lead to me writing for the big two. It was like, cool, I get to do a comic.
Yeah.
The opportunity to write Batman came around kind of as a surprise.
Yeah.
At another show. It was back when WonderCon was in Oakland.
Yeah.
And
missed those days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was BarCon, and Patty Jarris again said, I saw her at the bar, and she said, you know, they just fired a whole bunch of the Batman writers, and if you had any interest in writing Batman, I'd suggest they talk to you. And I looked at her, I said, of course I'd love to write Batman. I'm a private eye writer.
Man, fuck that shit.
Well, I mean, it's quite literally, you're talking to somebody who, in particular, at that point, my novels were about a bodyguard because I was trying to figure out how to write a private eye story without it being about a private eye. And what I ended up falling into was an entirely different genre.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. They weren't private eye stories. They became suspense thrillers because that is the necessary extension of a story about protection.
Sure.
But I was like, basically you're saying, hi, you want to write the greatest pop culture private detective in history? Yeah, I think maybe I might be interested in that.
Yeah.
So that led to an introduction to Denny.
Yeah.
And that introduction led to Denny saying, well, I've read your novels and I really liked them. See if you can write a comic. And I literally flew back from New York and wrote what became the first Montoya story I wrote, Two Down, and sent it back. And the next thing I knew, they were just throwing work at me because they were like, we've got No Man's Land coming and we are short writers and you're a warm body. And I was young. I didn't need to sleep and I didn't have kids. So I was turning around scripts in, 24, 48 hours. I was just a machine for them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those early scripts, because you just mentioned that for Whiteout you had already written a script for number one. So what was your so first off, was that script for number one any good at all? And so what I mean is, did it end up being what's in the book?
I understand exactly what you mean. Yeah. And it's funny because after the Old Guard came out, I got contacted by Writers Guild America West saying, we're wondering if you have like your original scripts of Whiteout that we could include in our library because we have a library of resources. And I never responded because, one, I didn't know where they were, and two, I wasn't sure I wanted anybody to see them. I had written the scripts. Based off of the imperfect knowledge that comes from reading Alan Moore script excerpts at the back of Watchmen, which is the worst way to learn how to write a script.
Right.
Neil Gaiman script excerpts coming out of the back of some of these Sandman collections.
Which were Alan Moore scripts, really.
Exactly. So this is not good way to learn how to script.
Yeah.
And then, and God bless Steve Lieber, and then me taking my favorite comics and literally sitting at my desk with them and counting panels and making notes and going, okay, so I'm going to try an 11 panel page. And Steve very gently taking my hand and saying, okay, what works for Mazzucchelli won't necessarily work for you.
Right.
And so, like I said, I mean, the difference between script 1 and script 2 and script 2 and script 3, and by the time we got to script 3, I think I was writing 3, Steve and I had established the relationship. So then I was engaging with him as I was writing.
Right.
And able to then collaborate.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because around that time when you were working for DC, at least, they didn't want you talking to the artist. and we didn't have each other's emails or so on. So the ability to collaborate was much more limited. And it wasn't only until much later that I was able to get that level of collaboration back. And it was with people like Michael on Central, because Michael would call me or Ed up and he would be like, I just read this and it's stupid and you're wrong. And we would be like, what are you talking about? And Michael was always fond of saying, I spend 30 days with this script. You guys spend a week. Trust me. I know when you've missed a step.
Right.
And he was 99 times out of 100 absolutely correct. Right. We would have blown something. So, you know, I mean, it was, I knew how to tell a story, but I didn't quite know how to write a comic script. Those are two different things.
Sure.
And between Shrek and then Jamie Rich, you know, and Steve Lieber, you learn pretty quick.
Yeah. So I wondered, because one of the things you said earlier was, and I agree with, is that novels have a voice, have a distinct voice, but a comic script, it kind of is out of place. And so was your first script very voice heavy, or had you figured it out like once you started writing it, like, oh, this can't work?
I do have a voice when I write a script, because I think on some level intuitively I've always understood that it's an epistolary form, that I am writing a letter to all my other collaborators on the book. And so in the broadest sense, the purpose of the script is to say, here is the thing this is the story we're trying to tell. Here are the specific moments of the story as I envision them, and what is being said in those moments, and why these are important should be evident. And if it is not evident, I will attempt to clarify. And write back to me and let me know what you think.
Yeah.
And it's that part. I mean, in my scripts these days, if I know who I am writing for, quite literally, it'll be like, I mean, there's the Lazarus script I just finished. It literally has whole sections like, Michael, I'm thinking it'll look like this, but do whatever you need to do, because we both know that your storytelling sense is better than mine graphically. And and sure enough, I'll get a call from him being like, that's not a splash. Right? That's not a splash. I can do it in 5 panels and it'll be much more fair. It's like, great. That is not a hill I have any interest in even assaulting, let alone dying on.
Yeah.
Right.
How much do you think about say the page turn? I
always write with a page turn in mind. Okay. But I do not, I know a lot. Oh, I won't say a lot. I know comic writers who have done everything from literally doing a templated page breakdown. So they map the whole book, to making their own little mini comics so they can look at it as a handheld thing. I think the novelist training has made it easier for me to to sort of compartmentalize things in my head as I'm working. So I don't often need to have the physical breakdown. I can see it in my head and hold it in my head, and then even walk away from it and come back to it, and work on something else and come back to it.
But in a novel, you don't have a page turn.
No, but you have a chapter end.
Right, but that could be a long sequence or a tiny sequence. I mean, I've read chapters which are 4 pages and chapters which are 50 pages. Right. Like, so the skill, it seems like, is a different fungible skill, or am I wrong about that?
It's a different technical skill. It's the same narrative skill. Okay. Right? Because the narrative skill, if I'm writing a novel and I somehow convince you to part with your hard-earned money and take time out of your, busy schedule to open it up and read it, I don't want you leaving. Right? Like, the primary goal of the novel is for me to grab you by the nuts and drag you through the story.
Right.
If I do anything in the if the prose at any point ejects you from the narrative, I've failed. Okay. And that is narratively the exact same thing as writing to the turn.
Okay.
I want you to keep going and go, well, what's going to happen next? Holy shit. What's going to happen next? Oh my God. Are they going to be okay? What's going to happen next? And it's the exact same thing in a narrative, right?
But having it happen every 2 pages versus every X pages is a different muscle set, right?
Right. But not every, because the key question there is what next, right? It's not how big, right? It's not, it is not a need to have something explode on every page or to chase the protagonist constantly.
Sure.
It is to engage you enough in the story emotionally that you care about somebody in the story or some aspect of the story enough to want to see how it's going to turn out. And if I can keep you there, then it's a question of modulation, right? Do I turn it up to 8 here? Do I take it down to 3 here? The page turn, because a page turn that ends on an, turning to the explosion is just as legitimate as turning to the moment when they first hold hands, right? Those are both beats in the ongoing rise and fall of the narrative. So
does your approach, sorry, I should say, has your approach changed between working for mainstream comics where you literally have no idea where the page turn might actually be, versus working on an Image comic or an Oni comic where you have control over what that rhythm is?
And I mean, look, the thing about, there are a whole bunch of problems with Lazarus not coming out regularly. It has hurt us horribly, and I am the first to admit it. But I will say this: I love the fact that there's not a page in those books that isn't a page we wanted there. Right? You don't pick up an issue of Lazarus and there's never an ad for something, right? And if there's an ad, it's because we wanted to point you to it. I lost track of the number of times I would have written to a turn and then gotten, the issue from DC, and they would have broken it because they dropped in a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup ad here. Or
that happens to have Batman in it. And
the really good ads are when they are vaguely of the same palette and art style, so you for a moment think you're in the story still.
Oh, it kills me, man. It kills me.
Oh my God, apoplectic.
So we're almost out of time because you said you wanted to wrap this up.
I mean, seriously, Brian, I would happily go for another hour, but I've got to work.
So easy. It would be so easy for me not just to let this go. But I wanna ask at least one question about Laz. And I want to ask you about moving it from a 32-page monthly comic to a 50-something page quarterly comic.
We've been doing a 64-page, and we were quarterly for the first 4, and then we got pandemic. I mean, let's be honest. We got boned.
That's all fun. I'm wondering. I'm actually, just because I'm a retailer, and this is a fascinating question to me. I'm wondering about the economic way that it works for you as a creator. Like, did your sales stay roughly the same?
No. Our sales have dropped. I mean, as far as a marketing move, we could have been far more clever. And inconsistency in the schedule hurts that as well. I think one of the things that on an economic level that we've done is that the price point of the quarterly means that the people who are reading it just for the story, they'll trade weight. But the nice thing about Lazarus and the nice thing about everything I've done at Image is that if the issues don't earn, the trades ultimately do.
Sure,
we always end up covering our costs. And I believe in the periodical format.
Yeah.
And want to be able to present in that format.
Yeah.
The idea had been we will be able to put in more story and more ancillary material in these things, because you're going to end up with 20 pages of magazine effectively,
right,
and 44 pages of story.
Right.
Here's one that's going to really bone you. Lazarus Risen 7 is probably going to be, we're going to have to add an extra signature to it.
Wow.
And it's probably going to be 72 pages.
Wow.
Same price point. I won't raise it.
Right.
Because it's going to have 56 pages of story in it.
Yeah.
I suspect that we were trying to find a quarterly middle ground, and it was not. It's not the title to have done it with. It's just not the title to have done it with.
Right.
I think, and I would argue pretty passionately that you're getting your money's worth.
Sure, absolutely.
That you get 44 beautiful pages from Michael and Santi. You get really good short fiction with illustrations.
Yeah.
You get the engagement that, we're known for in the back half of the book. You get artifacts. You get, for the tabletop role-playing nerds amongst you, you get RPG information.
Right.
But putting together something that big slows us down, and it prices us up.
Yeah. And you ultimately, I think, and this is the argument I tend to make with people who seem to prefer to want to do original graphic novels, is out of sight, out of mind. You're off the market. One of the values, I think, for a creative individual is access to the market and being on the market on a regular basis. So, I would suggest to a degree that a writer like yourself has a cachet and a name because you were doing monthly comics for a really long time, and people got used to your quality and what you're able to produce, and you know what I mean? And that you're not doing yourself any favors necessarily by being off the market at that point.
Well, and look, I mean, we've discussed, we're coming up towards the end of Lazarus. We're gonna end up taking a hiatus after 7 comes out, because Michael and I are both pretty much brutalized by the world at this point. And one of the things I want to do, and we're going to need to discuss it, is we're pretty much at that point, we're on the downward slope.
Yeah.
If I were going to do it just in issues, it would be another 6 issues at this point. Well, does it make more sense to turn that into 12 monthlies, right? 32-page self-covers? Does it make more sense to turn that into 2 OGNs? Right. And it's not simply an economic question for us at that point, right? It's also a question of workflow.
Sure.
Of what and here's the other thing, and this is just another example of one of the things you have to consider. Every time we change the format, I have to change how I'm writing it, right? Sure. 44-page script is not 2 22-page scripts. Understood. It's a 44-page.
Yep.
So if we're going to say we're doing now 2, 136-page OGNs,
it's a different structure. It's a different thing.
Exactly.
It's a different process. I completely understand. Yeah.
So and so those are also questions, right? And the only thing I can say to mitigate, and it is not fair to a retailer, but the only thing I can say to mitigate it is we can get this wrong because it will be in trade eventually. Sure. Eventually you'll have the trades.
Yeah. There's no right or wrong. To me, it's a question of I just believe that economically being able to double dip on the work,
Yeah.
like makes everybody happier at the end of the day, you
Yeah.
know, on your side as well as mine, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and it's not, I'm not like, oh no, only do it this way, because clearly, you know, clearly books work just fine. But
Yeah.
I think that for, you know, for a lot of, there's a big class of creators that taking yourself off that market for that time, it's not a good idea.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
you know, I think about, I always think about, what if Dan Clowes had just done original graphic novels, right? And like, we wouldn't have had 8 Ball, and we probably wouldn't have had half of the books,
Yeah.
because he would have gotten halfway through them and gone, this is terrible. Why am I doing this? It's because he serialized it that he's like, but I've got to finish this.
Yes.
I've got to finish Velvet Glove. I don't care if it doesn't work. I've got to finish it because there's already 40 pages out in print, you know? And I think that that's an important lesson for comics.
I take it very much to heart, and ironically enough, on the Discord that I run, you know, the links in the Lazarus issues, we've had sort of a steady influx of people over the last week or so.
Yeah, yeah.
And I literally was posting today, why? Like, where are these people coming from? I have not put anything out in a year.
Right.
And, you know, one of my regulars was like, yeah, you're up on Humble Bundle right now. I was like, oh, okay, that explains it. That explains it.
Yeah.
But it is a very real, and for writers, it's a little different, but definitely for artists, there is a FOMO factor. If you're not on the stands, you don't exist.
Yeah.
And so I have ceased to exist in comics.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I'm existing over in feature films right now, but but I love comics and I don't want to stop.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, hopefully in 22 and into 23, there are like 3 new books that should be coming.
Nice.
And one of the things that I am very actively trying to do, and the return of Black Magic.
Very good. I was going to ask about that as well.
Yeah. Is I don't want to. One of the things that's going on is we're not soliciting anything until we've got arcs in the can.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I do not. I don't want to be chasing our tails, and I don't. It makes everybody's job so much harder if I say to you, "Here's the first issue of this thing. Here's the second issue of the thing." And now you got to wait 4 months for the third. It's like that's bad for everybody.
Right.
So I do have the luxury right now, career-wise, to say I can cool my jets for 18 months as we get everything ready.
Yeah.
Right. And then once it's all ready, we can go to Image and we can say, where do you want to schedule these? Because we can go. Yeah. You pull the trigger and we can go.
Yeah. Nice.
So yeah, nice. That's the goal.
Very good, very good. Okay, so the last whiteout question, and this is only, I was doing a little research. You know, I always do the, you know, I go hit the Wikipedias just like, you know, before I do these interviews, you know, and I had completely forgotten there was supposed to be a third whiteout.
Yeah.
Or night, depending on your source.
Yeah, whiteout night. And I think Steve got about 11 into it, and I never finished writing it.
Okay, so that's off the table at this point.
It's funny, you know, Steve and I had some stormy days in our relationship. I will say that water is so under the bridge, right? I want to work with him again. And I suspect before he and I are done, we'll tell the last one. One of the things that was going on in Night, and this is, you know, part of the question, time has passed. Antarctica has changed. Like the Antarctica that Carrie is in Whiteout and in Melt doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Right. There's a narrative question of how do I approach that? Do I age her 20 years?
Yeah.
Or am I just going to sort of wink and nod and pretend it's something else?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these may not be huge questions for most people. For me, they're like, I don't know how I get back into it, how I tell this
Sure.
story.
Sure.
It was, Steve and I always knew what the slug was going to be. It was that Carrie's leaving the ice. The only question is how.
Yeah.
And then it was going to be a picture of a body bag,
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, then now the ice has left. Well,
yeah,
right.
there's not a whole lot of Antarctica left.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, and I'll tell you, when I started,
with climate change, it feels like you have a whole new story there.
That's actually what Night was about.
Okay.
It was about the fact that the Monroe Shelf is coming apart.
Yeah.
And I started it over a decade ago, I think. This is not news.
Yeah.
And it was also about the fact that Carrie's losing her, say it's called Night because she's going blind. She's suffering macular degeneration because she's been on the ice too long. So we I don't know if we'll ever tell it. There are a lot of stories that I have wanted to tell, and for various reasons they get set down. Sometimes it's because they're not ready to be told. Sometimes it's because something else wants to be told first.
Yeah. Well, it's there in Lucien's library, and we can read it in a dream.
There you go.
That's how I feel. All right. So last two questions.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to give some of this. Maybe you're not ready yet. I always ask, is there a thing you want to plug that's coming up? You said you have 3 new series. You're probably not ready to announce that yet.
Nothing has been solicited yet, and and the problem is I don't know when it will be.
Got it. Yeah.
I will say that Cutley, Hamner, and I have been working on something since 2019 with a variety of distractions that when it is said and done should be 5 issues and complete.
Yeah.
I do not know when that will see the light of day, but it is being worked on right now. Yeah. I'm working on something with Rick Burchett. We have issue 1 and issue 4 done. Don't ask why issue 1 and issue 4.
I love it.
And he's going to be starting on 2 in February and 3. And once we get 5 and 6 done, that'll be the first complete.
Okay. Very good.
Though we may break it into 1, 2, 3, and then do 4, 5, 6. Okay. There's another thing I'm working on with Eric Troutman and Mike Henderson.
Nice.
That's probably going to be the first to see the light of day.
Okay.
And it is the way Eric and I talk about it when we're working on it is we talk about it like, you remember when you were 12 or 13 and you would see an issue of Heavy Metal and you would like make sure nobody else was looking at you as you flipped it open? We wanted to tell a comic that gave you that feeling again. It's not really naughty. It's just It might be naughty. It's just that naughty. Yeah. It's just it feels a little a little pulpy, transgressive in that sense.
Right.
I
like it.
Just wanted it to have that. I wanted to write a book that if a 12-year-old found it, they might be worried their mom would see them reading it.
Yeah, I dig it. You've said there's going to be more Laz. There's going to be more Black Magic.
And more Old Guard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Leo just moved to Barcelona. And this year is going to see Tog 2, the movie, go into production. When production on that starts to roll, Leo should be drawing the 3rd story.
Nice.
Which is right now called The Old Guard Fade Away. Okay. The canons of the movies and the comics now are going to be very divergent things, and that's as it should be.
That's exactly as it should be. Yeah.
And then the only other thing I would plug is, and it dropped today, is from
Compass.
Image is Compass.
Yep.
Which is drawn by Justin Greenwood and written by 2 bright Australian Bonnie faces named Andrew Mackenzie and Dave Walker. And it is It is so many things, and in Hollywood terms, you're not supposed to say things like pulp. It is absolutely a love letter to Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
And it is born out of literally that moment of looking at Disney going, oh, we're going to do more Indiana Jones, and going, except there's so many. I love Raiders. Raiders is my favorite movie.
Ditto.
It's so problematic. There's so many things that are problematic and rehashed and so on. It's, how can you give me a pulp adventure? Give me a pulp adventure that will feel like a pulp adventure, but isn't the same one we've seen before.
Right.
And they did it. They gave me 13th century Wales and enough historical verisimilitude that Shahida, coming out of the House of Wisdom of Baghdad as a cartographer and explorer and scholar, is just a fantastic hero.
Yeah.
And Ling is a fantastic foil.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that the barbarians in this story are the Welshmen. You know, it's like Wales is Barbaria. Yeah. The Mongols are the most civilized people in this damn thing. You know?
Yeah. No, it's a really great book, and I thoroughly I wish I'd thought to bring a copy of it so I could show it on camera, but people should definitely check Compass out as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the last question, the place we always end this up.
Yes.
This
Burn
is
it all. No, sorry.
It's a long running series. We've been doing this for 7 years now. There's almost 225 people we've interviewed about making comics and stuff. So a lot of people watch this series who want to make comics of their own.
Right.
They don't know quite where to start. They don't know quite what to do. If you had one piece of advice that you would hand over to an aspiring comics writer, what might that be?
I'm gonna give you the writing advice that I give people, which is there are things you will learn as you do and as you read, right? You see the tricks and you see how people do things and so on. You can learn all of that. All of that therefore can be taught, either actively or passively, but it can all be taught. The thing that makes a writer is that they put their ass in the chair and they do the work. Even when they don't want to, even when it's really, really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Even when, and I mean really, really hard in the sense of the words are not coming. And even when, and this is the big one. Look, we all have to get through our days. We've all got jobs and, you know, people who need us and so on. It's that it's consistency and discipline are going to be the things that will win the day.
Yeah.
Be consistent and be disciplined. And if that consistency is you work on your writing 6 days a week, and the discipline is, and you do it for only 20 minutes, the 20 minutes that you carve out just for that, set a timer, but it's sacrosanct. That's what you do. And if you do that, the rest of it will come. The rest of it you can figure out. Yeah. But the way you get good at it is by doing it a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. That's where it starts. Then, you know, you want to talk about advanced degrees, we can talk about the other things you do next time or whatnot. But
sure.
But it starts with your ass in the chair on a regular basis. So
yeah, I'm with you. This has been a great conversation. I wish we had another 90 minutes because I feel like we didn't even start. We
really could have kept going.
Well, we'll have to do it again. Ben, put me back on a 1, will you, buddy? There we go. All right. So I want to tell everybody, if you are looking for a good book to read, if you want to read something entertaining that is smart, that is action-packed, got great characters, Whiteout. This is a book you should read. So read this book, okay? You're sitting at home, pandemic and you've got nothing better to do, read a book, get this. Hey, and if you buy it from us, then you also get a signed bookplate by Greg RUCKA that is only from us. So that's kind of cool. So do that. Our next show is the Kids Club, and the book is Otto, a Palindrama. This is by John Agee, and it's a book that's told entirely in palindromes, which is just awesome. It's very cool. It's a very cool, very elegant little book. The Adult Club, and that's on Sunday, that Sunday show. Next Wednesday, we're doing the Adult Club, and the book is No One Else by R. Kiku Johnson, who I probably mangled their middle name there, and we'll get that right in person. And then next month's Classic Graphic Novel of the Month Club is something filthy. It is really dirty. It is really pornographic, and it's the first time we've done that, and we're picking Ogloff. This is my favorite webcomic of all, and it is so dirty, but joyously dirty. So that's next month's book. So that's what to look forward to for the next couple of shows. I want to thank Ben for running the camera. I want to thank my staff, Katie, who's here, Zoe and Kat, who aren't, for being my staff and making it so that I can keep doing this. I want to thank Jordan for doing the production stuff from all the way at home backstage. I want to thank every member of the club for your membership and allowing us to do these and have these kind of conversations. And I want to thank Steve Lieber, who's not here, but I want to thank him as well. And I want to thank Mr. RUCKA. Put him back up on the screen. There he is. Thank you, Greg, for coming here and doing this. It's been a good show, and really, I profoundly thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Okay. We will see you next month. Well,
cheers, everybody. Take care.
All right.